first speaker will be Xiomara. And Xiomara will self-introduce because she knows herself best.
Thanks so much for having me here. My name is Xiomara Castro, and I work with an organization called Citizens Trade Campaign. So it's up here. Hopefully everyone can see it. It's a little light. Our website is citizenstrade.org, and that's how you spell my name. The Northern California organizer for the organization. And Citizens Trade Campaign is a coalition organization, so we're made up of many different groups, labor, environmental groups, faith groups, public awareness groups, all kinds of small groups as well, who are interested in creating just and fair trade. So I'm going to do a brief overview of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It will probably, hopefully answer some of your basic questions if you're still, trying to wrap your mind around what this trade deal is, how it came about. But it'll probably bring up more questions. And so hopefully we can get through, this information and, get to the discussion part of it, because I feel like that's where, people learn the most when they do these presentations. I'm going to stop in the middle because I'll be talking, mostly to labor, and Suzanne is going to be talking to us a lot about the environmental aspects and the notorious ISDS system, investor state dispute system. So, and then I'll come back on to talk more about the organizing and what people are doing to stop the TPP. Is there someone who could do the slide and change the slides for me? Great, thanks. So I just wanted to pull up this map so that you can all see the region of the world that we're talking about. You can't really see the eastern part of the world there a little bit, but it's there. So the Trans-Pacific Partnership, these are the negotiating countries and now the signing countries. So we have Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, the United States, and Vietnam. What's interesting about the Trans-Pacific Partnership and new to any trade deal that we've seen so far is that the TPP has a docking agreement. So, and it also has no expiration date. So any country is open to signing on to the agreement if they agree to the terms. So just a brief history, I'm going to go through this really fast. Shortly after the passage of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, the Clinton administration initiated talks for an NAFTA-style free trade agreement for all of Asia. And there were two created, APEC and the FTA, which was the Free Trade Area of the Americas. Both of those failed. They failed because the countries in those regions started to realize, what was the scope of these trade agreements. And also, NAFTA started to reveal some of its real issues and problems. So both of those kind of dissolved. And then after that, because the United States was still very interested in having this type of trade agreement, there were a couple countries that came forward. So that was Brunei, Chile, New Zealand, and Singapore. And the Trans-Pacific Strategic Economic Partnership Agreement was created. Also, CAFTA was able to be passed in the late 90s, so that's the Central American Free Trade Agreement, which is everything from Guatemala to Panama and the United States. Also, multinational corporations started to lobby the U.S. government again for the Asian NAFTA. They really wanted it to happen. And so here's a timeline. Basically, in 2008, Bush notified Congress that the U.S. would join the Asian trade agreement with Australia, Peru, and Vietnam. In 2009, this is when Obama starts to get involved. During 2009, he pledged a review of this Asian deal, but it was never done. And then in November 2009, he surprised everyone in Congress by announcing that he would engage in the TPP. And then throughout 2011 and 2012, the TPP was being negotiated among all these countries. And the TPP started to miss deadlines in both of these years. In 2012, Mexico and Canada joined, and then in October of 2012, during the presidential debate, Obama described the TPP as part of his strategy to counter China. Just remember that when we go through what the TPP actually does. And he wanted to use this in his way to exert influence over China. In 2013 and 14, again, in 2013 January, Obama uses the State of the Union address to declare that the TPP and this other trade agreement, which I also have information about, but I won't talk about tonight, with the European Union, or what is now the TTIP, were priorities for him. And Japan joins in 2013, and then the negotiations miss another deadline. And then in 2014, when more negotiations are happening, we finally get to see some of the TPP because of WikiLeaks. They were able to make connections with some of the negotiators who leaked texts around the agreement. And then in 2015, this year, Congress gave the president basically sole rights to negotiate a TPP. This was the Trade Promotion Authority, or what was called Fast Track. There were up to 20 secret rounds of the TPP negotiations held at this point, because the whole agreement since 2008 was negotiated in secret. And then in November 5th, just recently, the TPP is declared finished. The text is made public and sent to Congress with a 90-day review period. So now Obama is expected to sign the TPP agreement in early February 2016 in New Zealand. So he's already declared he'll be in New Zealand. That's where one of the signing partners are, and then he'll sign it there and send the implementation legislation to Congress. And so we're probably expecting to see a vote in Congress in March of 2016. So it won't become law unless Congress passes the implementing legislation at that point. Unless we dump it, right? And we win. So that's why that date has an asterisk, because it could be that we win, and that won't happen. So just to talk a little bit about the larger context of how this thing, in the wake of what we have the TPP. We've had over 20 years of NAFTA-style trade agreements. We have the WTO. All of these are corporate managed trade agreements. And what has that left us with? It's left us with over 5 million U.S. manufacturing jobs gone, as well as electrical retooling and other jobs that have supported those jobs. We have over 45,000 U.S. manufacturing facilities gone. Millions of service sector jobs have been offshored, and those are call centers, computer programming, engineering jobs. Real median wages are at 1972 levels. Our tax base has shrunk, and that's important money for schools and infrastructure. And we've had a flood of unsafe imported food products, as well as the environmental health zoning laws have all been attacked in foreign tribunals and dumped. And Suzanne will talk more about that. And also, really with NAFTA, it's been really clear how much displacement, migration, and hunger in developing countries these trade agreements have caused. So this is really a threat to workers, to climate, to health, medicine, internet, and democracy. So this agreement, the TPP, has over 25 chapters. Hardly any of them actually have to do with trade. But these are some of the highlights and the things that these chapters will do. It's not just about environment and labor. There's so many other issues. One of the things that will disappear is Buy American laws. So our government is really encouraged, and actually I think it's actually a law for them to go to American made first. Or whether they're setting up a new office or they need supplies for something, they have to go to American made. What the TPP does is erase those laws and open up the floodgates for many other manufacturers from other countries to get those contracts.
You mean by other government levels, like I prefer a bus company, a U.S. company has to be offered versus
Yes.
public funds.
Yes. Now public funds are going to be used to purchase stuff from wherever. It'll offshore.
China.
Mm-hmm.
Very rich.
Yeah. it's local government, state, federal. Our medicine prices will increase, and there will be a decrease to access in generics. Big Pharma was a big advisor for this trade deal, so they got patent laws and regulated more rights in terms of how long their patents are extended. It'll hurt our climate and environment by giving polluting industries more power. With this TPP deal, there will be more increase in fracking, and what Japan needs from us is natural gas, so we'll see a lot more exports in that, or an increase in production here as well. And then there's the IP chapters, and they basically threaten net neutrality and internet freedom, so there's a whole chapter around the internet in there as well. So this is fake trade, right? It has nothing, again, to do with international trade. So what's the reality of the TPP text? I just wanted to take one chapter out of the 24 and really explain what's going on now that we, like I said, it was negotiated in secret for all of these years. In November 5th, we finally got to see the real text along with Congress. The only people that were allowed in the negotiating rooms were corporate advisors, as well as our U.S. trade representatives in other countries. So even officials in other countries knew more about the text than we did. So if we take just the text that's on labor, what does it say? Basically, it's a race to the bottom, and it exacerbates that phenomenon. It puts labor in the United States in competition with workers in Vietnam, who earn 60 cents an hour, and in Malaysia, where a third of the labor force are victims of human trafficking. Now, this thing about human trafficking in Malaysia, had been part of the TPP negotiating rounds, and many advocates had really pushed for Malaysia to be out of this whole process. And the United States government has a trafficking in persons report that they take actually very seriously, and rank each of the countries in the world and what are their human trafficking levels, and do they what's going on, basically what is going on in those countries. Are the governments in those countries also involved in human trafficking? Do they turn a blind eye? These kinds of issues. And just in 2015, earlier this year, Malaysia's tier was 3, which is the worst possible for human trafficking. And right before the report came out, early this summer, Congress basically changed the ranking of Malaysia to tier 2, which is like, oh, it's not that bad, they're working on it. This is in the same year that they have found, hundreds of human trafficking camps in the jungles. People really call that out, which was advocates who are working on just trade, which is why is Malaysia's ranking changed, where does that food come from, and all that kind of thing. And basically the president stood by that and said they deserve their ranking to be changed. And it was basically to let them be a part of the negotiations of the TPP.
Do you mean human trafficking like Malaysia? You mean they import workers working from other countries working in Malaysia?
So it's a base, actually. So there are Malaysian folks and there are people from all over Southeast Asia that end up in these camps. And basically, there's been plenty of reports that have shown that the Malaysian government is part of this human trafficking chain. So whether it's customs officials or border people or any kind of officials, they get paid bribes to look the other way or actually be a part of it and help construct this human trafficking system. So it's not just Malaysian folks, but it's like people from all over Southeast Asia who get trafficked through Malaysia or found in these camps in the jungle of Malaysia. And a lot of them end up working in whether it's like the seafood industry or electronics as well. A lot of folks end up in these semi-slave where they owe a lot of money to the people who gave them the jobs and those kinds of situations. So in terms of currency standards, another thing that the labor chapter does not do is, basically have any kind of standards for the partner countries to not manipulate their when Vietnam or Japan messes with their currency or devalues their currency, we lose, hundreds of jobs or 100,000 jobs that go. Because basically corporations are saying, well, our labor is worth, we don't have to pay as much in those countries, because of the currency rates. Rules of origin is another thing in this chapter when you really look at it and read it and start to decipher what it's saying. So rules of origin are take a product, right? And you think you tear in a car, you look at where are all these parts coming from, where were they made? Because nowadays, manufacturing is global, and when a single turbine or a car is not made in one country. So before, during NAFTA, third parties, there was a limit in terms of third parties. Third parties meaning countries that are not part of the trade agreement. So now we have third parties are able to enter the United States duty-free. And this is weaker than NAFTA. So if we take a car, basically, whether it's a Toyota or Honda, whatever, manufactured in Japan, the majority of those parts are manufactured in China. And sent to Japan, and then it's put together and sent to the United States. And this was a huge thing in the negotiating rounds that Japan really stuck to, they did not want any kinds of rules of origin put on their vehicles to get into the United States duty-free. So now we have the majority of the parts within the car can enter the United States without any taxes. And even the Wall Street Journal, which is like the Wall Street Journal, I don't know if they've ever met any kind of business proposal that they don't like. And they're saying over 300,000 jobs will be lost in the auto industry alone because of the rules of origin. And again, this applies to computers, cars, wind turbines, solar panels, like anything like that. And it's basically an open door, policy towards China. And, we heard from Obama before, this is our way to combat, China to pivot towards Asia. If we don't write the rules, China will. But basically, right here with the rules of origin, part language in the TVP, basically opening the door to them. The ISDS system, again, Suzanne will talk more about that. But with this system, it basically will make it easier for corporations to ship jobs to countries where they can sue to erase public health regulations. And this does not encourage investment in the United States, where it might be harder to, get rid of those regulations. And again, forced labor. So there is language in the TPP around it, but it's completely inadequate language and completely unenforceable. Basically, the text encourages or discourages countries on importation of slave labor-made goods. But if we look at the partners in the TPP countries, all of these are exporters of slave labor goods. They don't import those goods, they export them, they make them. So basically the countries, according to the text, they could put up a flyer at customs and say no slave labor made goods, and they would be in compliance. And here's, this is the one that just gets me, is like, there's 6,000 pages in this agreement. The labor chapter is 13 pages long. It's extremely similar to the Peru, Korea, Panama, Colombia free trade agreements. And all of those have proven to be completely inadequate as well. The only way to trigger enforcement, whatever the language is in these agreements, the only way to trigger that is for the White House to basically unilaterally start the process, which they've never done. Advocates have been trying, Just Trade activists have been trying for years to get Obama to start, enforcement procedures in those countries, especially Colombia, which has dealt with a lot of human rights abuses to their unions and to their labor force, and he has never, started any of those procedures. So we can see that these are just going to be completely unenforceable. What's next? So I want to stop here and have Suzanne talk about environmental and ISDS chapters, and then we can come back to talk about how we defeat the thing. And she has a slide. Yeah.
Just one quick question. Could you name the countries that are in the TPP?
Oh, sure. Yeah, they were in the beginning. So it's New Zealand, Brunei, Australia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Chile,